Welcome to the Albany Book Festival online, presented by the New York State Writers Institute at the University at Albany. You can learn more about the festival and find direct links to independent booksellers at our festival webpage, albanybookfestival.com. Follow us on social media and hear from more videos from the Writers Institute.
Hello and welcome to the Albany Book Festival. I'm Ed Schwartzchild, a fellow of the New York State Writers Institute and director of creative writing at the University at Albany. And I'm here today with the internationally known best-selling author, Colum McCann. And we're going to talk about his new novel, Apeirogon, and the writing life during these difficult times. Thanks so much for being here with us today, Colum. I really appreciate it.
Such a pleasure, Ed. Nice to see you.
Oh, it's great to see you. I thought we could start, maybe if it's all right with you, with just a sort of a general question about the genesis of Apeirogon, and Genesis, you know, such a biblical term, seems like an appropriate term for describing the novel. But could you tell us a little bit about that, the story of how the novel came to be?
Sure. We're going to talk later about Narrative 4, a nonprofit that I co-founded with Lisa Consiglio and Ishmael Bea and others, and I'm looking forward to that. And I went on a trip to Israel and Palestine with a group from Narrative 4, and we went there for 2 weeks. And really, it was an extraordinary trip, and we went in all sorts of places, looked at, met people from many different backgrounds: writers, Palestinian rap stars, artists, settlers, soldiers, imam. And at the end of the trip, towards the very end of the trip, 2 days from the end, I walked into this office where two seemingly ordinary-looking men were sitting there, Rami and Bassam. And they proceeded to tell me their stories, or to tell us their stories. And literally my heart was cleaved open by listening to them. It was an extraordinary story that they told about how they had lost their daughters. Rami lost his daughter to a suicide bomber in 1997, and Bassam lost his daughter to a rubber bullet shot by a border guard in 2007, and they'd come together to share their stories and to use the force of their grief as a weapon towards some form of hope and some sort of engagement and the desire to say, we need to know one another. With nothing else will happen. Nothing will be over until we learn how to talk. And when I saw that happen, I knew that I would have to write about it. I didn't know it was going to be a novel, mind you. And that was the thing. I went to them months later and said, I would like to write a book about you. And they said, okay, fair enough. But I said, no, I want to write a novel. I want to imagine it. And they let me go. And it became Apeirogon. It was a five-year work. And here we are now today.
It's incredible. And I mean, there's so many incredible aspects of the novel, from its structure to its subject matter to all the elements that you bring to the page. And it's just, I mean, you're familiar with attempting ambitious, audacious work. I mean, it's all through your career. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about what it meant to try to tackle this particular subject, and how you brought yourself to it, and how it compared maybe with some of the other bold projects you've done in the past, from whichever novel you want to talk about. But you're a writer not unfamiliar with trying to attempt what seems impossible and then somehow making it happen.
Well, thank you for saying that. I mean, I wrote a book called This Side of Brightness many years ago, where I lived with the homeless people in the subway tunnels of New York, on and off, for about a year and a half. And I wrote a novel called Dancer, which was a fictionalization of the life of Rudolf Nureyev. Just one look at me, you can tell I can't dance. And I have attempted other projects, and as I've gone along, including trying to write about Frederick Douglass in Ireland, and Senator George Mitchell in Ireland. This one was terrifying, man. I mean, I have to say that I really did give pause and say, do you really, really, really want to do this? I mean, you're going into very hot territory. My publishers were like, you're writing about Israel and Palestine? They're like, oh, and what are you going to call it? I said, I'm going to call it Apeirogon. And they said, what the hell is that? And how mad are you? But I'm glad that I stuck by my guns. It is the most difficult thing that I have that I've ever attempted. But it was, I think writers work towards their obsessions, and this was an obsession of mine. And one of the things that I want to say is that I wanted to acknowledge right from the beginning that I was confused. I still am confused. I think these are important words for today. I think they're words that we're particularly forgetting in the American political landscape, that we're afraid to say, I don't know. We're afraid to say, I need to know, and so on. And I went in there relatively clean. In other words, not knowing all that much about the historical background. But I wanted to tell the story of these two incredible men. So yes, I went there over and over again, and I rode on Rami's motorbike, and I drove in Bassam's car, and I walked through checkpoints, and I slept in their houses, and I met their families, and I dined with them, and they said things to me that they had never said even to members of their own family. It was an incredible time, and also then trying to figure out what surrounded it, and getting it read by Israeli writers, getting it read by Palestinian writers and artists, and juggling all these apparently contradictory things into what one hopes is a truthful document, but also knowing that you're going in somewhere that you're not going to come out unscathed, and it's just not going to happen. And I knew that from the get-go, and yet I wanted to talk about these two men because I think what they have to say is so incredible, not just to Israel and Palestine, but to New York State, to where we happen to be, to Belfast, to the Bronx, to Kentucky, to South America. What their essential message is that we need to know each other above ground, because if we do not know each other above ground, we will end up knowing each other 6 feet below ground. While that's simple, nothing is simple, especially that apparent simplicity. There's something enormously brave, especially in the Israeli-Palestinian context, for them to be going into schools and weathering the taunts and sometimes even riots outside the schools or the cafes that they go to, because what they're saying is so different, even though it really is quite simple.
It's such a powerful story, and I can't imagine what it's like to actually be in the room with the two of them and get to know them. It just from hearing your voice, it just sounds so moving.
They're beautiful. They are beautiful. I mean, I would love to come up to the Institute and bring Rami and Bassam, and we might do it next year once this what's surrounding us disappears, and we hope that'll happen soon. Rami and Bassam want to bring their message around the world, and that's what they live for. In fact, I mean, one of the things that struck me is that they were keeping their daughters alive by telling the story, and then I thought, oh, it's like Scheherazade, and then I thought, oh, 1001, and then so the book is actually structured in 1001 cantos, small pieces, and it's sort of built to go 1 to 500, 1 to 500, and 1001 sits in the middle, but the book could be read backwards and forwards at the same time too. It's a little bit of a crazy book, I have to admit.
I mean, that was a question I definitely wanted to ask you, was about the structure, and it's nice to hear that connection to Scheherazade. And but as a writer, and thinking about our audience of young writers, or some less young writers, all trying to hone their craft. I mean, how how did you find that structure? Was it something that, I mean, it must have taken years just to get to that notion of how to put it all together, or did you get that pretty early on? Can you share some of your journey in terms
Yeah.
of discovering the structure of the book?
Well, one of the things that I want to say as a writer to our younger writers is that the writers generally don't know what it is that they're doing. And that's our big secret. We fly by the seat of our pants.
Yes.
To be too acutely conscious of what you want to do beforehand sometimes brings a paralysis to your work. So sometimes it's good not to know. You jump in, you become an explorer, and you don't know what it is that you're actually going to find. And writers are not actually as intelligent as their books seem to make them to be. The form comes when you work hard enough. You got to put your rear end in the chair, and you got to stay there, and you got to fight it. So for this particular structure, I knew that I wanted to disrupt the reader, yes. And I knew I wanted to work in a fractured form, yes. But that's all I knew. In the beginning, I thought it was going to be in 50 different sections. That was a lot. And then I thought, oh, maybe 52, because, one for a week. And then I thought, this is interesting. I like this. I'm going to go ahead and try 365. Thinking like that until the day it dawned on me that it was apparent right from the very beginning that it had to be in 1001 structures, as an echo of Arabian Nights, but also for lots of different reasons. There's lots of mathematical tricks in the book, and there are amicable numbers, and there are blank sections, and there are things like that. I hope that doesn't put people off, because essentially it's a simple story about one man who gets on a motorbike early in the morning, drives through the Christian town of Beit Jala in Palestine, another man who drives home from this monastery to his house in Jericho at night. In between all of that, there's a lot of other stuff that happens, including, say, the history of weaponry, including, talking about, notions of, peace and history and all of those sort of things, that music. In a lot of ways, Ed, I ended up, and maybe this is good for writers, we're like musicians. You go into a room and you hear the guitar, and then you hear the tambourine, and you wait and you work and you work and you work until that music begins to make sense. And you don't always have to go crazy out of your own. I go out of my own experience, but there was a recklessness in that as well. I was also very, very, very aware of the idea of, cultural appropriation, and stepping into territory that some might feel would not be mine. And my only answer to that is that we must step in with absolute grace, humility, and with the knowledge, Ed, that saying, I don't know, please teach me. And instead of applying ourselves onto another culture, we say, teach me so that I can increase my culture when I go away. I am stupid. I don't have the answers. Please help me. And in doing so, I think then we increase our lungs. That's what a younger writer must do, because I don't want to write about, my middle class 55-year-old self. I want to write about others, but I don't want to be barred off from others either.
Yeah, amen. When you were saying earlier that you expected to be, that you expected you wouldn't emerge from this experience unscathed, is that part of what you're talking about now, or were there ways in which putting yourself, whether it's going into the subways or whether it's going into the West Bank, is there a sense of putting yourself in danger that you're talking about when you talk about not emerging unscathed, or are there specific things that happened along the way that sort of changed you?
Well, some of the things are physical danger, but listen, it's, I don't want to get into it. Like, it's a lot more dangerous to be a firefighter, a lot more dangerous to be baking bread, probably, and than many of the things that I do. So I don't want to celebrate myself as some sort of like intrepid person, because I'm not really. It's the ideas that get to me. But I want people to come with me into new territory. I want the reader to experience what it felt like to be Rami and Bassam at that particular moment. And one of the most beautiful things that happened to me is that Bassam said to me he couldn't read the book. And I asked him why, and he said, I don't want to relive it again. I can't relive it again. And your writing makes me relive it again. He'd read all the journalism about himself and watched documentaries and so on. But in this particular case, he said no, he couldn't do it. And then Rami was incredibly nice about the book, and they were so generous. That's why I wish you could meet these guys. They're really beautiful. They work together so well. And they allowed me to be, my own form of fearlessness. But I think, yes, a writer must be fearless. We must risk everything. We must even risk humiliation to get to the really deep end of things. You risk sentiment. You risk all of these different things in order to, and if you fall, then you fall. It's not, you can always get back up again. But I think risk is an enormously important thing. Do you get dinged at times? Yes, and that's it. That's fair enough. I'm practicing now a sort of an intellectual aikido. So that people say to me, "Oh, you're anti-Israeli or you're anti-Palestinian or whatever it happens to be." I this aikido move, and I turn sideways, and I listen to it if it's smart. I listen to it because I'm still learning about all of this, and it's beautiful to be engaged. And I think, as I said very early on, what we talked about, for me and for you and for all our listeners to say, I don't know. Oh, that's a big step, a big psychological step. I think the 19th century transcendentalists, especially the Americans, Whitman and Dickinson and Emerson and people like that. When Whitman was saying, do I contradict myself? Very well, then I contradict myself. I am large, I contain multitudes. That was so glorious. Because the writer nowadays is asked not to contain so many multitudes. She is being asked to be sort of one thing, or he is asked to be one thing. When we're not, we're messy, extremely messy, and we make mistakes and all sorts of things. So I like the idea that we can go in and say, you do your very best. Can I tell you a solution to the Israeli peace idea? No, of course not. One state, two states, confederation, federation. No. But what I can do is make you feel what it feels like to walk through a checkpoint when you're a Palestinian, and what that means to the wider issues in the world. And that's part of my job. Yeah. And the reader completes it.
Mm-hmm. No, that's wonderful. Listening to you talk about I contain multitudes and the messiness of what we do, it makes me think about another element of this particular novel, and much of your work too, is that working the boundary between or bringing together fiction and nonfiction elements, and the choice in this book to have the stories of Bassam and Rami right at the heart of this, like the most nonfiction elements come. Or at least one of the most striking nonfiction elements comes at the heart of the book, right at the middle. And I'm wondering how you work about that. And I want to go back to something you said earlier in the interview, where you mentioned that moment where you asked them for permission to write about them, and in a different context, maybe you were censoring a little bit. What I have heard about that conversation before is you warned them. You said, hey, I'm a novelist, I make shit up. And they said, well, that's fine as long as it's true. Right. And that fascinates me, right? That you're the fictionist, you're the fiction writer, but you have to tell the truth. And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how maybe the containing multitudes and working with fiction and nonfiction somehow is truer than what we get in the news, say, or in these other realms that claim to be truthful.
Ed, it's such a profound question, and it's such a timely question. You know, one writers I think have been shaking out for the past, certainly for the past 20 years, but maybe all the way back to the new journalism back in the 1970s, that this question really began to become one of the questions of our times. What is fiction? What is nonfiction? You know, what is true and what is not true? For me, I sort of doubt the word fiction. I also doubt the word nonfiction. Fiction means to shape. Comes from fictus, to shape things. But nonfiction is also shaped. And the question is, how do we shape something that is texturally true? Because you can take a fact, a simple fact, and you can pack it up as a mercenary soldier, dress it up in any way that you wanted to do to go fight whatever war you wanted to have. But it's much different when you get into the messy orphanage, and you know it's not. You know, the truth is harder to discern. It seems to me that when you're talking about elements of the human heart, love, pride, pity, compassion, and all of these different things, that's when you get into the truth. It's when you get into things that are contradictory, that's when you get into the truth. It's when you get into things that are factual, but sort of, messy in the most extraordinary existential way, that we can get at a form of truth. So this particular book, which I call a hybrid novel, uses elements of fiction to tell what people traditionally see as a non-fiction story. I'll give you two examples.
Great.
One example is very simple. Rami drives a motorbike in real life. It's a 750cc motorbike. I've been on the back of it. He drives very fast. He's a good driver, and and he drives through Jerusalem exactly the way that I describe in the book. When I sent him the book, he said to me, "Yes, I love all this." He said, "But you got one thing wrong about me." And I said, "What's that?" He said, "You put me on the wrong motorbike. You put me on a motorbike with gears." And I said, "I know I put you on a motorbike with gears because he drives an automatic, but I want the reader to be on the motorbike. And if the motorbike is an automatic, it's not quite as good as me shifting, you know, touching the clutch, pushing the right foot down and changing the gears. It's a different thing. The jolt of the word gears, you know, clutch, even the word change within a paragraph makes the reader sit on the motorbike. And I want her and him to be on the motorbike. The second thing I did, for example, which is also a fiction, is I bring them to a monastery in Beit Jala to tell their stories. That's the heart of the novel. They get there and there are people there to listen to their stories. Really, it's you and me who listen to their stories. But now they meet in Beit Jala, this town of Beit Jala, a couple of times every week. But they had never, ever met together in the monastery. Now, the reason I did it in the monastery, well, it's beautiful. They make wine there. There's a sense of, you know, like stories and storytelling. It's also a Christian monastery, and you have a Jewish man and you have a Muslim man coming together in this place. That's a fiction, but it's a fiction that delivers a deeper truth about the actual experience. There's lots of other little things, you know, in the book, you know, about Rami's hunger strike and things like that, that I change it just a tiny little bit, only in service of the reader's deeper understanding. But I think I can stand by my book and say that it is an honest portrait of those two men's lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, thank you for that, Colum.
Thank you.
I think this, I mean, one of the questions I was going to ask was about, you know, this sort of if there were a new edition of Letters to a Young Writer, what would it include? But I feel like you've covered that, and your answers have been so directed towards what young writers should be thinking about confusion, about messiness, about multitudes, about the bravery of saying, I don't know. But so maybe instead of asking about that, I'll ask just for a closing question about how you're reflecting on these pandemic times and how you think writers should, or how do you think writers are being affected or influenced by it, and what are the dangers of trying to write about it too soon, or or anything along those lines, if you would weigh in on that.
Specimen A right here. I began my COVID novel in June. I picked a very specific time, Good Friday, 12 hours on a COVID shift in a hospital in New York. I have lots of friends who are doctors. I went and I interviewed them hours and hours and hours and hours and hours on end, and I began to write the novel. It wasn't the right novel to do. I spent 3 months at it. It's gone. It's in a drawer. But I learned. That's what you got to do. Sometimes you got to look at it. Sometimes fiction is too close. It was too close to journalism. We need time away from it. What has this time done to writers? To me, it's been really, really quite difficult. And you know, I thought I had something to write about, and every day it changes. And there's so much going on out there that I have to acknowledge. So many brilliant young people, you know, taking to the streets and teaching me things. I'm learning things about myself that I didn't know before, but have been opened up to me. This COVID stuff makes you sort of feel meaningless in so many ways. Like who am I? You know, just like a tiny little bouncing molecule. You know, like operating around here. But at the same time, you're incredibly meaningful because it matters. You know, you have to wear your mask. You know, if you don't wear your mask, you're going to get people sick, or you're going to get sick, and things. So everything you do has a meaning. Every way you walk down the street, when you cough, when you don't cough, when you approach someone. I've also seen some beautiful things happen, and just in the way people acknowledge each other. But also, then I look sometimes at the internet, which is wrong. By the way, young writers, do not read Amazon reviews or do not get Twitter. Please stay away from Twitter, because you know, there's so much divisiveness around right now. I will say this: I don't think that any of us, in any place in this country, are as stupid as our political parties seem to think that we are right now. I think this is a much more nuanced country. I think our story is not being told. I think it is up to the young writers out there to get into the dirt and the churn of this country, and to not render it down to simplicities, which is what our corporations are doing and what our media is doing, and often mea culpa, what our artists are doing. No, what we need to do is go in there so bravely, so recklessly, with an inner recklessness that is attempting to find a broader, greater, more decent truth. You do that, you will be happy with yourself at the end of the day. And I love and respect the fact that people are taking this on, because telling stories nowadays, writing fiction, you have to work out of a reckless inner need. But by God, when it works, it really works.
Oh, thank you so much, Colum. That's a fantastic place to end. Couldn't have drawn it up better.
Thank you.
I want to remind everybody listening that Colum's books are available for sale via links on this page. And just thank you so much again for being with us here as part of the Albany Book Festival. We're really grateful, and it's an honor.
Thank you, and continue the festival and continue all the work that you guys are doing, because it's so important to get these books, out into the world.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much.
This book festival is made possible with the support of the McGuire Family Endowment at the Writers Institute, the University at Albany Foundation, the Office of the President of UAlbany, the Peacock Family Foundation, the Capital District Library Council, Stuyvesant Plaza, Chet and Karen Opalka, Charles Toohey and Alice Green, Pernilla Dake, Elizabeth Ruthman, and Betsy Lopez. If you appreciate our programming and would like to support the Writers Institute, you can find out how at nyswritersinstitute.org.